What can the Mariners do to improve their offense this offseason? And who can they actually target? That's all coming up on this episode of Bleav in Mariners. What is up, sports fans? What is up, Seattle Mariners fans? Jordon Schultz, Schultzy, a Pacific Northwest talk show host, sitting in with you. Today, we're diving deep into what the Mariners need to do this offseason to see if they can fix their lineup. Of course, we all know by now the Seattle pitching staff, one of the best in baseball, really one of the best in baseball history. You feel like 1 through 5 guys making their starts, doing it so well. So many guys in the Cy Young conversation at different parts of the year, literal aces for most other staffs at your 1 through 5. Yeah, the Mariners lucky in that regard and really good at developing pitching in the bullpen and on their starting pitching staff for the last few years. That is, to give Jerry DiPoto some credit, that's a positive. But their offense ranking near the bottom in just about everything until the month of September. So what is the solution? Who should the Mariners target to fill those offensive gaps? I'm going to try to go over all of it in this episode of Bleav in Mariners. So let's dive right in. Maybe get to some intriguing trade options as well that the team could explore in their offseason plans. So a couple different ideas have been tossed out about not only by Mariners pundits, but some other teams, beat writers and national pundits that know that there might be some sellers coming up here this offseason, and that is obviously not the Mariners, to see where the Mariners could do some deals with those teams to improve. So we'll get into that. But well, of course, I should mention that the Mariners going into this offseason are doing all of this with, kind of that hamstrung plan, right? Kind of capping themselves at the knees a little bit already by saying that, we work within constraints just like everybody else, right? That's a quote from owner John Stanton that I had in my last episode of Bleav in Mariners. Go listen to that episode as well as read the interview that he did with Daniel Kramer of MLB.com. Just all encompassing. Talking about everything from the Scott Service firing to team payroll to why he believes in Scott Service to, the mentality of the team that they don't sign big name free agents. So essentially, yeah, that's what we're working with here. We know already that the Mariners are not going to be going after Juan Soto. They're probably, even though I've still seen some rumblings that they're not going to be after Pete Alonso, that they still might be going after him anyways. Like, he's going to be too expensive. And I do think that New York probably just going to end up re-signing him anyways. There's really no better place for Pete Alonso than with the Mets. I don't really understand why, after you've had success in New York, why you'd ever want to leave unless it's, to go to the Dodgers or something. But like, they got to run out of money at some point, right? But who knows? Like, but that's the thing, that the Mariners, even if Alonso doesn't re-sign with the Mets, aren't really in on those big name free agents. And we've already heard that, but not because of money, even though they do say that they have to operate within certain constraints, right? But because of their strategy, just they believe that they know better, that they can develop hitters. And I think I saw like either Colt Emerson or Cole Young went like 5 for 6 or something like that in like the Mariners fall game. And it's just like, I don't care. I'm sick of seeing these headlines. In fact, just to detract for a quick second, those headlines are the reason why people keep buying tickets. Those headlines are the reason. And yeah, here it is. I got it now right in front of me. Colt Emerson was awesome in his Arizona Fall League debut. 5 for 6, 4 doubles, 2 runs scored, 5 RBIs, a stolen base, and played great defense at shortstop. That was from the Mariners minors account. Like, okay, that's awesome, but that's a prospect. We literally don't know what he can do in the major leagues, yet Seattle has sold season tickets and sold fans on like the hope of the future based on, tweets like that and the performance of guys like that in the minors. He ain't doing it game 10 of the regular season up in Seattle. Like, he ain't doing it against the Yankees and Garrett Cole. So why do I care? Frankly, like, this is kind of part, and I'll get back into our offseason plan here in just a second, but this is kind of part of like the detraction that the Mariners do, like saying like, oh, hey, don't look behind the curtain while we're not actually spending money. Nothing to see here. Please keep spending money on us. Keep coming to our games. We're doing it for you. We're developing talent for you. Like, you're great at developing pitching talent, but you're not great at developing hitters. It's been proven. Your 9-year, 10-year Jerry DiPoto has been an absolute failure with that. Edgar Martinez has had to save your ass. making hitters better every time he's been in the building. And it's frankly stunning that Jerry Dipoto still has his job as president of the Seattle Mariners. But hey, yeah, this is the philosophy that we're going with, right? So stop buying into the lies. I'm going to get back to our offseason plan here in a second, but just those tweets, the performances of Mariners minor league players, yay, like we can celebrate them a little bit, but do not take that as a guarantee of future success, because that is one of the reasons why we are where we are. And frankly, it's how the Mariners front office people like think of this situation and how they believe that the organization should operate, that future glimpse of success coming to the major leagues should spell all kinds of success for your Major League Baseball team, at least their bank account in the current day. All right, so let's get really back into how the Mariners capped at the knees, not going to be going after any big name free agents, but they did say, we'll see if this actually becomes true. They did say that they are going to increase their salary beyond the in-house raises and arbitration raises. We're going to go through those here in just a second, but I mean, the Mariners have essentially, I think 2 years ago had a salary cap or a salary total of $140 million. This season, it was up to about 145 after everything was said and done. And yeah, we heard Stanton and Dipoto say, oh, it's going to go up beyond the in-house raises again, which what does that mean by 20 million? Does that mean by 30 million? Does that mean by $1 million? I feel like we're dealing in technicalities here. It's like the parents that say, yeah, we're going to go do something fun. And that fun is like what, for 20 minutes before you end up going home. Like when you hear your parents saying, hey, like we're going to go do something fun, we're going to do this activity, you kind of make it out to be in your mind like it's going to be like a full day or at least a full experience that like you can enjoy. And I know that that's what most Mariners fans hear when they say, oh, we're going to raise payroll. They're thinking multiple millions, tens of millions of dollars. Nah, I'm wondering if it's just going to be like a $1 to $5 million raise in payroll total. So yeah, working within those restraints, I think I've come up with a couple of ideas on how the Mariners can improve their roster even within those constraints that they're putting on themselves. I mean, if they're only going to grow salary marginally and while doing that, basically not able to spend much money on the open market, yeah, once again, it is very true in a literal sense, but a literal sense only, that the Mariners are going to have to raise payroll this season. But how can they improve within those constraints? So let's start here with kind of like where we're at salary-wise, where Mariners contracts are going. Of course, Julio Rodriguez. We'll get to some arbitration contracts, but I do need to mention first, Julio Rodriguez, this isn't an arbitration deal. It's his mega deal kind of kicking in. His salary goes from $8 million to 20 some million dollars, like 20 and a half ish, 20.19. So almost 20.2 million. And that's a consistent number, obviously not including bonuses or anything through the year 2029. And that is kind of the point where the Mariners decide if they want to exercise it up to like a $400 million deal, possibly 500 with different escalators and MVP clauses. Or if they just want to let him go. That's time will tell. That's to be seen. But the big raise for Julio coming up from, it wasn't 8 million. It was 12 million to 20 million. So a raise of $8 million. And then on top of that, you've got a lot of guys getting arbitration. Austin Voth, he was making 1.25 this year, going to go up to about 2.2, maybe 2.3. And this is according to MLB Trade Rumors, by the way. A bunch of people put this out. Ryan Divish of the Seattle Times, I'm pretty sure everybody on Mariners Twitter was putting this tweet out about the Mariners, kind of their guesstimated projections of what arbitration raises would be for all the players on their roster. So we're kind of just going off of those numbers, and they're usually pretty close. Divish does say that the algorithm is pretty close to what MLB teams use in trying to figure out what those raises should be. So yeah, I'd say that we're working with pretty accurate numbers here. Both getting about $1 million more. Chargois getting up to about 1.7 million, so about $500,000 more. Then Luis Arias is going to be non-tendered. He's on this list making $5 million again, but good Lord, thankfully he's going to be non-tendered most likely. He just has to be for a franchise so conscious about cash. They literally paid a guy that just hasn't been good since 2021, $5 million during an offseason where they were apparently desperately trying to trim salary. Plus, Urias just represents everything wrong with Jerry Dipoto's approach when it comes to evaluating hitters or free agent hitters. That whole Moneyball algorithm thing, that's Luis Urias, represented it like completely for Jerry Dipoto. And he likes that a little too much. and for some reason is just willing to pay those guys, the has-beens and never-wases that his algorithm or that his stat sheet says are going to come out and produce and have a repeat of, some random good season 3 seasons ago. Dipoto just loves paying those guys. And I don't know why he's been in love with that his whole career, but that's just kind of what he is. That money would be so much better being spent somewhere else, and I'll get to where I think they should spend that, and that actually does free up a little bit of salary as far as re-signing a couple of free agents that they have. Trent Thornton, if the Mariners do keep him, going up to about $2.1 million. That's about $1 million for him. Randy Arozarena, a big topic of conversation, wondering if he got too expensive, the Mariners were going to trade him or not. Absolutely not. His salary going to be near $12 million, according to MLB Trade Rumors. It's 11.7, at least the projection is. And that, of course, is a raise. Arozarena going from 8.1 to almost 12. So that'll be about a $4 million, right now about a $3.6 million raise exactly. Josh Rojas getting a little bit more money, going up to 4.3 from 3.1. So that's another $1 million. So you see just this $1 million here, $1 million there kind of tacked on. Logan Gilbert's going to be getting a big raise, going from about $4 million in salary, according to this projection, to $8.1 million. Taylor Saucedo staying pretty similar, maybe getting a couple $100,000 in a raise. The major league minimum that he was pitching on, I think it's around $740,000 major league minimum. So yeah, he'd get a $250,000 raise if he sticks around. I don't see why they wouldn't keep him. Saucedo's been nails for the Mariners with the lefty out of the pen for them. Gabe Spire, if they keep him around, not much difference in salary for him, a $900,000 clip. And then George Kirby, of course, getting a raise along with Cal Raleigh. And those are the other big raises that we were talking about, looking at like the Mariners core players and their salary going up. Cal Raleigh, it's a big jump from the major league minimum of $750,000 up to about 5.6. So there's $5 million right there. And George Kirby, same deal. He is going into his first year of arbitration. The Mariners have had really, really great pitching for like a cheap, about $700,000-$800,000 rate. And now, yeah, he's going to start getting big boy dollars. And also, these charts representative of why the Mariners need to pursue the World Series now, why they need to go get a hitter now, because these contracts are all going up. It's not going to be as cheap to keep these players anymore. So when you look at like the salary projections in the future, they're $20 to $30 million higher than they are now for the season because these big players getting raises. It's just going to go up exponentially. About 2 years from now, you've got a 2-year window before these guys become unaffordable in the Seattle Mariners' current organizational philosophy. But they do have a couple of routes to go to try and improve themselves this offseason. Now, it's got to be a star or at least a very good young player or two that the Mariners are getting. It can't be a bunch of marginal moves. It can't be like an okay player, like that we've seen in the past, like an AJ Pollock who's been fine, in the past, but as of 2-3 years ago, just hasn't hit, or a Tommy La Stella, a former All-Star, or another Luis Arias, a former All-Star. And it can't be a miss on trading for somebody like a Jesse Winker who's going to go have, an off year. Congrats to Winker. I mean, he and Ryan Stanek are both having a bunch of success for the Mets in the playoffs, and I'm not really mad about that, but it's more so representative of something that you just really can't do. You can't lose in this trade if you're Jerry Dipoto this offseason because they're not going to be able to sign a big free agent name, so it's got to be the right free agent name. We'll get to who they could target here in just a second, but once again, is, this list that I've got, does that line up with Jerry Dipoto and his philosophy for how the Mariners are going to get better? He has admitted that he needs to evaluate how he brings in hitters and how he looks at hitters because it hasn't been the best way to do it. But once again, like it can't be marginal moves. I guess, yeah, that's really the main point that I'm making here. It's got to be a star player or it's got to be like a couple of young guys. So, beyond those arbitration raises, you're probably looking at what, 20 to 30 million bucks, like just in those. Beyond the arbitration raises, like where are you left salary wise? At about 130 to 135 million if those projections are correct. But that's after you do this, which Adam Jude already said the Mariners are going to do, and that is decline Jorge Polanco's $12.5 million option. That should be one of the easier moves of the offseason, as well as Luis Arias thankfully being non-tendered. So his $5 million would be off the books. That, I think, frees up some money to go re-sign Justin Turner. You have to bring Daddy Turner back. I mean, Justin Turner in the month of September, 299 average, 398 on base percentage, 861 OPS, 7 extra base hits, 6 RBIs, 13 base on balls, and hit a couple of big home runs, hit 2 in one game, hit a grand slam about a week after he arrived in Seattle, as well as the coaching aspect that he brings. He's basically a faux coach with all the experience and winning that he's been a part of, and because he's been in the league so long. It's such a better idea, instead of spending $5 million on a has-been, to go get a very well-known veteran player that it seems like Jerry Dipoto kind of forgot about, like, needing for a roster. It's like all of a sudden Carlos Santana comes back into his mind when the Mariners went to the playoffs in 2022 and how big of a part of that roster that he was. All of a sudden, now that Justin Turner's arrived, Jerry Dipoto remembers that that's a key thing. So I do think he's actually realized that he made a mistake, and even himself would admit that the $5 million that he spent on Arias would be much better used going to Justin Turner. Sure, he'll be 40, but I think he made $13 million last year, so I would guess no team's going to be offering him more than like $5 to $7 million. And with his age, it's a reason that he's cheaper. Along with that, Turner did tell Seattle media that he would love to be back. He's considering this as an option. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if like the Dodgers wanted to bring him back, for a last go around kind of goodbye tour in his final season in the league. But who knows, man? If he plays like he did this next season back here in 2023 again, he could play when he's 41. I don't see a problem with that. But that $5 million that Luis Arias is making, and that's not even counting the 12.5 that Jorge Polanco would make that the Mariners are going to decline. That $5 million would be just so much better spent on a veteran in Justin Turner. It needs to happen. The presence that he's brought to the clubhouse has just been so needed, in something that the Mariners were lacking last season and most of this season. I think it was Luke Raley at one point in either a postseason interview or kind of wrapping things up, or in the last week of the season, said that the Mariners would be in the playoffs if JT were on the roster the whole season. And I totally agree. That veteran presence, that ability to still play 100, maybe 120 games as a DH, a fill-in infielder next season. And once again, that faux coach on the staff as well. So yeah, this needs to happen. And it's nice, thankfully, Jerry Dipoto stumbled upon this thought with acquiring Justin Turner, even as he was. I will give him a credit again, trying to call the Blue Jays about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. So you figure if the Mariners do bring Justin Turner back, you've already heard Jerry Dipoto say that the outfield this season, Victor Robles, Julio Rodriguez, Randy Arozarena, is going to be in place for next season and probably beyond, that is the outfield of the future in Seattle. But you basically then are left with what? After declining Jorge Polanco's option, you're left with second base to fill. You're left with third base to fill, because it never really was filled this year in the first place. It was a Josh Rojas platoon with either Arias or Dylan Moore at different points. And you got Luke Raley kind of around, playing some outfield, playing some first base. If you can bring Justin Turner back and fill him in at first base, fill him in at DH, then you're looking at second and third that you need to fill next year, right? So you can go young. You can bring Ryan Bliss up from Tacoma to try to play second base. I'd be fine with that move, but I do think they need a couple of proven major league hitters. I think, trying to develop one kid is fine, but at the same time, we're in a very short window of what I think is about a 2-year opportunity for the Mariners to win the World Series before everybody gets too expensive. And speaking of too expensive, the Mariners still obviously having to clear, maybe if they can, try to clear off a lot of salary from their books next season. One way to do that, moving on from the Mitch Witch. So Garver and Haniger guaranteed around $30 million next year. That's certainly a cash bonus in a sense, if Seattle is able to get them off the books, right? Huge cash money bonus for the Mariners, able to spend all that basically on a player that they acquire through trade or in free agency, if they're able to get them off the books. John Morosi was on 710 ESPN Seattle, gave him a couple of ideas, neither of which of these ideas I really liked, but it's got to be done considering the team's self-imposed financial restraints. So essentially the Mariners have 2 options to get those guys off their books. You can do one, a deal where, very similar to the Milton Bradley Carlos Silva deal back in the day with the Seattle Mariners, you can swap one bad contract for another. Carlos Silva was a black hole of money. He pitched terribly after the Mariners paid him in free agency. I think it was like a 48 or $60 million deal. It was essentially making 12 to 15 million as like a black hole fifth starter for the Mariners for a season or two. Jack Sorensic flipped him to the Chicago Cubs for an also struggling and major problem in the clubhouse in Milton Bradley. It did not work out. But, you know, you give credit for Sorensic trying to turn lemons into lemonade in that situation. It just didn't work. The only kinds of players that would work with now in this situation, as far as like, you know, salary for salary swap being even, if you're saying like both Garver and Mitch Haniger going in a trade, that'd be like Javi Baez from the Tigers. He's currently injured and had a terrible, terrible season, like has just fallen off the face of the earth batting wise, and you wonder if he can ever come back. Chris Bryant, who's just had injury problems with the Colorado Rockies after signing a mega deal with them in 2022, but that theoretically would be a deal that works if the Rockies are trying to unload some of the money off of their books. But that's long-term money the Mariners will be taking on. But hey, that would be a swap where you necessarily wouldn't have to give up like a prospect because you're taking on that long-term money for Chris Bryant. And then the only other one that I really see that this works with salary-wise is Mike Trout, because you're talking about a straight up salary for salary here, that kind of scenario that could theoretically make a straight up trade work. But if it's Trout, that's going to involve a top prospect or two. Even with the injury history of Mike Trout, the Angels are still going to be very demanding, and that price is going to be very high. But that kind of leads me to the second option that the Mariners have to clear up the salary of the Mitch Witch, and that is including a prospect in a trade, doing a very similar deal to a Jared Kelenic to the Atlanta Braves for some money off the books, and essentially getting rid of an Evan White contract and getting rid of dead money on your salary cap. It sucks, but that essentially is what the Mariners locked themselves into. And I hope Jerry Dipoto isn't stupid enough to do a deal like that again. He really got lambasted by the fan base. But it's just not looking like they're going to have many options other than doing something like one of those two going forward if you're trying to get rid of the contracts of Mitch Garver and Mitch Haniger. And then also, as far as trades go, you wonder, one quote by Dipoto talking about the young pitching staff that he has, being a very young, successful part of the team, a building block, and how you wouldn't want to move on from that. The keyword young in his quote made me wonder if Luis Castillo is an option on the trading block for Dipoto. I mean, if he called Cleveland and asked for Lane Thomas and Will Brennan, a team in Cleveland that desperately needs pitching in the playoffs right now, if you call them in the offseason, asked to swap those two for Castillo, they'd at least strongly have to consider that, right? And then even a recent report from Sports Illustrated saying that the St. Louis Cardinals could be on the verge of a full reset means catcher outfielder Wilson Contreras, one of their top players, could be available. Maybe even just for a mid-level prospect or two. He's making $18 million, though, for 3 more seasons. That might make sense as far as like a salary swap for Luis Castillo. Maybe you could throw in one of the Mitch contracts in that trade, add a mid-level prospect or two. I don't think that Wilson Contreras is going to get top-level prospect status as far as a return in a trade. But since 2022, Contreras has been really good, posted a 133 WRC+. That's 19th among all qualified hitters in baseball, 8th among right-handed hitters, 828 OPS, 14th among all right-handed hitters in that time, and the last 136 games. So basically like a regular season in Major League Baseball for most players. Contreras has had a 157 WRC+, 4th amongst right-handed bats, and 8th in all of baseball. So he has been one of the more consistent hitters, kind of quietly, all through the majors the last 2 seasons, and somebody that is absolutely acquirable for the Mariners. But if you want to start to consider free agents too, well, if they're not going for the top ones, who do you look at? You're starting to get into like a Paul Goldschmidt if he's not going to be, asking for too much cash. Maybe like a Willy Adames. I know a lot of Mariners fans have talked about getting him. He's coming off of his contract with the Brewers, making, I believe it was like 12 or 13 million a season. Gleyber Torres could be in there. And then you're kind of starting to like look down, maybe past that. Tyler O'Neill is a name that I think is pretty decent. That could be like a nice DH to the mix for the Mariners. So there are a couple of decent names out there, but none of them really inspire me, to think that their additions would immediately put the Seattle Mariners in contention. But is that really their goal? I don't know. They say it is, but I don't think a lot of Mariners fans believe it at this point. I mean, Anthony Santander and Jurickson Profar are also going to be free agents this offseason. Are they going to be too expensive for Seattle? If they're affordable, get them here yesterday. Then you obviously don't even have to trade anybody. You can basically run it back. And it would be nice if, Stanton and Dipoto followed through on their statements saying payroll is going to go up. And it was just because A, in-house raises, and B, they went and signed really good players like Profar and Anthony Santander. So that's kind of a few of my ideas on how I think that the Mariners could improve this offseason. It's obviously not really like a set-in-stone plan. I don't think that it's a good idea to toss out like here's my best 1 through 9 lineup, because the Mariners aren't going to go get half the players that I think that they should anyways. So I'm just trying to throw some options out there. I'm trying to get some conversation started amongst y'all with Mariners fans, trying to figure out, hey, who, what, where can we find these types of guys? Like, what are the best types of guys to acquire with the Mariners under the current constraints that they're putting themselves under? So that's going to do it for this episode of Bleav in Mariners. We'll get some more off-season plans coming up on Friday. Going to have a guest or two as well coming up in the next couple of weeks. Make sure, by the way, to give the podcast a 5-star rating and review, or subscribe to the channel and like the video if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please follow the show. It costs you nothing, and you can just unfollow me if you hate me later. If you are a former Mariner looking for a media opportunity, or a former Mariner and you are listening to this show, get in touch with me, get in touch with Bleav. We'll make it happen for you. Would love to have that former player perspective added to this show every single week. But thank you so much for tuning in, Mariners fans. Stay safe and keep those tridents up. See you soon.